1 out of 3 gets cancer. Look around and imagine that the person on every third seat have already or will be hit by this disease. Now, this is partially because of what we eat and what we drink and what we maybe smoke, but it's mostly because we live longer. In a country like Denmark, every year, around 38,000 people are diagnosed with cancer. Probably all of us here knows one of these, as a neighbor, maybe a good friend, or even a close family member. When I was 9 years old, my life changed forever. My mother got cancer and died just a few months later. The loss of my mother gave and is still giving me motivation to work with cancer research. Today, I'm a professor in medical physics doing research in radiotherapy of cancer. I'm here to share with you my fascination of how important physics is for curing patients with cancer using radiation. And I'm here also to share some good news with you, because did you know that more and more people are surviving cancer because we are finding new and better ways to treat this disease? Today, almost 2 out of 3 that gets cancer are surviving for at least 5 years. I'm here to tell you about a new type of radiotherapy that can cure patients from cancer with causing less damage to their healthy organs. Radiotherapy is an important treatment modality for cancer. It's used in half of all cancer patients, often in combination with surgery and chemotherapy. I'm here to talk about an advanced form of radiotherapy known as proton therapy. So what can proton therapy do? So far, proton therapy has often been used to treat children with cancer, because protons are much better for avoiding irradiating the healthy organs in the body. This is 2 alternative treatments of a child with a particular form of brain tumor where irradiation of the whole central nervous system was needed. So this is the brain and the spine. The color scale in these figures show the radiation dose, with the warmest colors indicating the highest dose. Now, radiation dose is the energy that is transferred from the radiation and into the patient. And it's precisely this energy that causes cancer cells to stop growing, but it can also cause normal cells to stop working properly. And we therefore want, in this case, to give the full dose of radiation to the brain and the spine, and if ideally, no dose elsewhere. As you can see, with the radiotherapy with photons, that was our main option in the past, large doses of radiation are also given to the healthy organs in the body. However, with protons, we are able to avoid irradiating almost all of the healthy organs, such as the heart, the lungs, the stomach, and the bowels. Now, all forms of radiation are based on physics, as they involve sending beams of radiation into patients to stop cancer cells from growing and spreading. So, to understand how these 2 forms of radiotherapy, with photons and with protons, how they work, we need to understand the underlying physics. So, let's begin with some history. The origin of radiotherapy traces back to the discovery of the X-rays in 1895 by the German physicist and Nobel Prize winner Wilhelm Röntgen. Today we know that X-rays are photons, so this is small packets of energy. The light in this room and the strong light here is also photons, but with much lower energy. Röntgen, he was experimenting with something called a vacuum tube. This is the instrument you can see here. You might think it looks a little bit like a big light bulb. What he discovered was that if he coupled a large electrical potential or power onto this tube, then a new form of radiation was created. And this, he found, this radiation could pass through most substances. And just a few weeks after his discovery, doctors already started using X-rays to treat cancer. And still, today, in radiotherapy, X-rays or photons are the main type of radiation we use. In addition, Röntgen's discovery was also the basis for all forms of X-ray imaging and CT scanning. It is an amazing discovery. It has had an enormous impact on humanity and healthcare in particular. It's used every day in hospitals all over the world. Another breakthrough in physics at that time that also turned out to be highly relevant for radiotherapy was made by the Danish physicist and again Nobel Prize winner Niels Bohr. In 1913, Bohr was the first to understand that an atom is composed of a positively charged nucleus with negatively charged electrons orbiting around, as you can see in this representation of an atom. Now, I am aware that, so having talked about these two basic discoveries of physics, let's try to get back to understanding how these two forms of radiotherapy with photons and protons, how they work. And I am aware that photons and protons sounds like they're almost the same. They're differing with only one letter. But I will show you that they are indeed very, very different. So let's begin with photons. Then there are two things you should note. The first is that, as you can see in Bohr's model here, atoms mostly consist of empty space. Secondly, the major characteristic of photons is that they neither have charge nor mass. So when photons enter into a patient, they can pass through a lot of atoms without anything happening, without losing energy or without changing direction. At the surface of the patient, all photons are still there, and therefore photons will transfer most of their energy into the patient quite close to the surface. If when photons pass further into the patient, some of the photons are absorbed, and therefore the number of photons and therefore also the energy that is transferred from the photons to the photon is gradually decreasing with increasing depth. So, what about protons? So, unlike photons, protons are charged particles with mass. And charged particles, they interact with each other. So, as the saying goes for us humans, opposites attract and likes repel each other. So, when a beam of proton is directed into a patient, then these positive protons, they will lose a little bit of energy in every atom they go through, due to these interactions with the negative electrons and the positive nucleus. If the speed of the proton is high, that also means that the time there is for energy loss or energy to transfer is low. So at the surface, the energy and therefore the speed of the protons is the highest, and therefore the energy transfer is small. But after a while, the protons lose more and more of their energy, and as they are coming, and therefore also their speed, and as they are coming to a full stop, they release all the remaining energy. And this creates a sharp peak in the energy that is transferred to the patient, but now at a large depth in the patient, so different from photons. This graph shows the radiation dose as a function of depth into the patient for photons and protons, illustrating what we have just talked about. What you see here is the basis of radiotherapy, and in particular, the difference between radiotherapy with photons and protons. What you see here all comes down to physics, as it is a result of how atoms look and how particles like photons and protons, how they behave when we send them into a patient. It's because of this difference that we now can treat children with the type of brain tumor I showed you in the beginning so well with protons. And it's also because of this that we now want to change radiotherapy or improve radiotherapy by treating as many patients as possible with protons instead of photons. So the idea of using proton therapy is not new, but it has taken a long time to mature. This shows you why it has taken so long. This is from behind the scenes at the brand new Danish Center for Particle Therapy, where we started treating patients in January this year. As you can see, the equipment is very large and therefore it's also very expensive. The cyclotron that accelerates the protons is more than 3 meters in diameter and weighs 90 tons. We transfer or we steer our protons into the treatment rooms through something we call a beamline using strong magnets. And in each of 3 treatment rooms, the gantry that can rotate around, allowing us to irradiate the patient from any direction, weighs 200 tons. And still, it has a mechanical precision corresponding to less than 1 millimeter inside the patient. It is it's a really impressive installation, somewhere around half a football field in size. This is what patients experience inside the treatment rooms. You can see the table that patients were positioned on when they receive radiation, with the radiation coming out of the head of the machine. You can see how we can rotate around, allowing us to irradiate the patient from any direction. So at our center, we are now treating both brain tumors in adults and children with cancer, including the type of the brain tumor in the child that I showed you in the beginning. In addition, we are also developing new clinical trials and protocols, both at our center and elsewhere in the world, to explore and to determine the potential or explore the potential of proton therapy for major tumor types such as the head and neck, breast, lung, prostate cancer, and so forth. But there are also challenges in irradiating these patients. The main benefit of proton therapy is this sharp dose peak, as we have talked about and I've showed you here. But the sharpness of this beam that makes protons so attractive also makes them risky. For every patient, we calculate how far the protons go until they stop, based on a CT scan in the patient, based on a CT scan of the patient. This CT scan is acquired a couple of days before start of therapy. And because of this sharpness of this beam and this finite range the protons will reach before they stop, then any change in anatomy will have much larger consequences for proton therapy than it will for conventional radiotherapy with photons. And this is particularly important because all humans, we constantly undergo anatomical changes. Every second, our heart is beating and our lungs are filling and emptying. Our bowels and our bladder are filling and emptying as well over minutes to hours. If we get a cold, then our nasal cavities are filling with fluid. And during the 5 to maybe 8 weeks of treatment, patients can lose weight or they can gain weight. We have already experienced this in the patients we have treated so far at our center, and we therefore already have procedures in place to make sure that we monitor in particular the longer-term changes, so we make sure that the dose is delivered where it should in these patients. I'm leading research projects where we are developing new tools and new strategies to image, monitor, and actively account for all types of anatomy changes on a daily basis, and ideally while the patient is still on the treatment table waiting for treatment to start. In addition, we are using the most advanced form of proton therapy delivery, where a narrow beam of proton is scanned like this over the tumor, layer for layer. And if you are treating a tumor, such as one in the lung, this adds another level of complexity, because both our dose spots and the tumor that we want to hit with the spots are moving, and they are most likely moving independently. So these are challenges that physicists like myself and my colleagues today are aiming to solve. And these are challenges that we just have to solve if we are going to achieve what we want, to be able to offer proton therapy to all cancer forms where radiotherapy is effective. Also for cancer in parts of the body with large anatomical variations. So, this is the story of my life. I have shared with you how I turned the loss of my mother in my childhood into my strength and my motivation to work with cancer research. I hope you also share with me the fascination for how important physics is for improving therapy or treatment of patients with such a serious disease as cancer, involving advanced technologies in installations as large as half a football field, required to accelerate and steer small particles such as protons into a patient. I hope that we are now making a difference for many more patients by curing them from their cancer using protons. And my hope and my dream is that no more 9-year-olds will have to experience what I did in my childhood. Thank you.